Welcome to the Next Level Podcast, powered by San Manuel, a series connecting you with the best minds in casino, hospitality, tribal government, and beyond. Enjoy the show.
Jennifer, how are you doing today?
Great, Kyle. Thank you.
I'm so pumped to finally have you on, to have the final boss in marketing, the SVP of marketing for Yaamava. Jen, knowing you more closely over the last year, you are the perfect guest to have on here because of your unique background, because you're that rare person who combines analytics, strategy, creative. So I want to pick that brain because it'll be super valuable for our audience. But to start, for those who don't know you, we always like to start with the origin story, the quick 3-minute kind of high-level story of, where you started, what you grew up, but ultimately led to what you do today.
All right. It's hard to sum 20 years in 3 minutes, but I'll do my best. So 20 years of experience, I should say. So I grew up in Oregon, born and raised, little stint outside, but not for very long. So I went to Oregon State University, graduated from there with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. Promptly moved to Texas to work for a little company back in the day called Motorola that made these flip phones and cool little gadgets. As an engineer, I was working there for a few years and then ended up moving to Las Vegas with my husband. He is my husband now, was my fiance at the time, because I was young and dumb and thought I could just go and find a job. So I ended up in Vegas looking for an engineering job. I had been some experience designing electrical substations, so I had interviewed with a couple of the utility companies out there, but I really kind of wanted to work in casinos. I mean, we were in Vegas, so there's lots of glitz and glam and flashing lights. And I remember driving by the Harris corporate office and saying, I want to work there. And I ended up working there. I got a job as a labor analyst, which kind of tied in a little bit to the engineering background, just because of the time and motion studies and workforce labor management and all that stuff. So that was kind of my toe dip into the casinos. Didn't think I would stay that long. Thought I'd get another job doing engineering somewhere, and I never left. Moved up through P&A for about half my career, maybe a little less than half now. Moved around the country, working for different markets. At some point, a marketing position opened up, and I was fortunate enough to get that one, and that was kind of my foray over into the marketing side of the world.
Jen, there's so much to unpack, but Motorola to casinos. So, throughout your career, I guess I want to start with, what was the pull for you for casinos? Like what was it? Because that's quite the stark difference between Motorola engineering and the bright lights of Las Vegas. Kind of what was that pull for you initially?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the kind of the same thing that I think a lot of people believe about casinos, especially, back then. It was, they're big and sexy and lots of excitement and lots of people. And I remember driving in Vegas up in the Henderson area, and I could look down on the strip, and I kind of had a little pitter patter, because it was it's just this sight of just, the Las Vegas Strip from above. And I don't know. I mean, it just seemed like I want to try that. And to be honest, I didn't really think about, an analyst job or any of that. I honestly started looking for an engineering type job within the casino, right? They had posted positions for design and construction and things of that nature. But I had found that posting for the analyst role, and I was thinking that, it kind of segues a lot of what I know how to do, but just in a different industry, right? So I took that leap of faith and just blindly applied. I give a lot of credit to my hiring director at the time. I do believe I kind of had a little kismet there, because she also happened to be a mechanical engineer. So I think that my resume kind of stuck out at her. But sometimes they say what's meant to be is meant to be. So.
And even taking a step back even further, because I think it's always interesting, especially for this platform, to understand kind of where people started, or were there signs early maybe when they were a kid, let's say before 20. So for you, that foundation of engineering and kind of that brain, what must we know about kind of back then, let's say before 20, that ultimately produced the leader and the person you are now?
Wow. I don't know. I mean, I was always the math and science nerd, right? I loved understanding how things work, how things go together, understanding that there's processes. I mean, even as a kid, I remember like, you had your chores or whatever, like challenging myself, kind of making a game out of it. How can I do it faster next time? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I multitask, if while this is doing this, I'm going to go over here and do this, and it just kind of, I guess, kind of how my brain's wired. Always trying to find out how to do things better. And so, honestly, I didn't even know what an engineer was when I was little, but as you start to grow up and talk about, everyone asks what you want to be when you grow up, and everyone's like, you should be an engineer. I'm like, maybe I should then, so there I was. And it's kind of interesting also because if I fast forward a little ways, I ended up taking my engineering training test after I graduated college. But when I went back to study for that, it kind of all came flooding back, like how much I actually do enjoy doing that kind of work. And I know a lot of people don't think there's a lot of similarities, or wouldn't think there's similarities between engineering and marketing, but there kind of are. So.
Where did you guys do time tests like in math? Did
Yep.
Did you just crush everybody?
No, so I'm not really great at quick math. Even now, I like my calculator.
Okay.
But to your point, it was trying to find my strengths. So if I knew, rather than trying to just go straight down and around, right? Like it was like a big grid, right? And if I knew a question, I'd go pick through and pick the ones that I knew quickly, right? And come back. And that was kind of my strategy on improving my time, because there was always a couple that just would never come to me quickly. Do you know what I mean? You always get stumped. I don't know if it was the 7s or the 8s or whatever. I don't remember which one it was, but there was one of them that I always struggled with. So yeah, I was not the fastest, but I wasn't the slowest. So there's that.
So I think what's interesting too for you throughout your career journey is pivots, which is always a conversation, not always, but a lot of times comes up on this show, because a lot of leaders have that in common, where they started out in A, they went B, C, sometimes it's linear, sometimes it's sideways, sometimes it's backwards. But for you, engineering to finance and accounting to FP&A to marketing, broad strokes question here, but for you, providing wisdom or tips for those, when is it time to make a pivot? How do I make myself kind of more in the spotlight to be considered for a pivot? Just take the question where you want, but what's your advice to people as they navigate their career, and when is it time to make a pivot, maybe into a different field or background that I'm not familiar with?
I think for me, I think there's a couple pieces there. One is it's time, and right time, right place, right time, or whatever you want to call it, right? Sometimes it's not controllable, right? Sometimes there may be a pivot that pops up that you weren't expecting. So, some of it is timing. Is it something you can or are willing to do at the time that it appears? I think the other side of it too is to be considered for those pivots is raise your hand. I think there's a lot of people that are hesitant, and a lot of people don't want to fail. And I know one of our sayings around here is, about failing fast, right? And so it's like, don't be afraid to fail. Have to have confidence in yourself. You have to raise your hand for opportunities that come up, even if they're just small projects. That's how you start to understand whether you want the pivot, right? Or it's sometimes it can manifest itself in several ways. One is you can just go straight up to your supervisor and be like, I'm interested in more opportunities in blah, right? And see if they're have any. But then there's other ones that just kind of come up in passing. And if someone says something, it's like, is that something I could be involved in? Is something, or I'd like to try that, or and that's I think it works both ways in the fact it allows you to understand, is that a pivot that I want to take long term? And two, is it kind of shows the leadership wherever you're at that you're willing and open to take those opportunities as well.
So were you always the first to raise your hand?
Always.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I guess for you, because I always like to pick the brains too of people who are a little more introverted. Um, was that kind of the way of your icebreaker, as you formed relationships with early in your career with your first supervisors or managers? Is that kind of how you built that relationship, or how did you go about building trust from your supervisors so that you could kind of raise your hand and let them know that, I'm trying to build this relationship, I'm trying to progress through my career? Any tips on that end?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. Like, to your point, I am an introvert, self-proclaimed. I admit it. Um, Self-aware, but it's not that I don't like people, right? It's just
Right.
that it takes me a minute to warm up to you. So usually by the time I've worked with people a while, there's a comfort level there. But also, I don't know. I'm just one of those people that kind of throws themselves all into things and make sure that I'm not going to half-heartedly do something or do half the job, right? And I think that sets the tone. That set the tone for me a lot of the ways to understand that, as I was working on projects or doing things, I wanted it right. Um, I wanted to also, and if there was a way to do it better, then I was also going to do it better, right? And so, and then relationships, people talk, and you start to work through, and it's like, hey, I have this role. Who do you think? And then people throw out your name, right? And then those conversations are had, and it just continues to snowball.
So I mentioned this when we started the jump, but I truly mean this. You're one of the rare people who I totally see as people can listen to this, the analytical math brain, but the creative brain. You're also very creative. I mean, look what you've done here at Yaamava, build a whole new brand. We'll touch on the entertainment theater, but like just working with you over the capacity of the last year, I'm like, wow, like you have both. So which one is the creative side always been there, or just talk to me, because I think it's interesting because I look at your career arc, I could see, how engineering makes sense to finance. I could see how finance makes sense to marketing because you could talk the language of the business. But I guess I want to know, like, on the creative side of things, especially as you built your career in marketing, how did you go about, is that natural to you? Are you a unicorn? But just talk a little bit about that rare side of you. It seems like you have both working, and then also how do you go about building the one that maybe is not a natural strong suit?
That it's hard for me to say. I'd like to think I'm a unicorn. I think some of it was there.
Yeah.
But I do think it's about exercising that side of you, right? Like, and challenging yourself. Again, for me, it's always about how can I do or be better, right? How can this be better? And um, and every time something creative, you're like challenging yourself. How can this be better, right? And it's like flexing your mind, exercising that. But to be honest, a good analyst is also creative because they have to be creative in how they're looking at the answer that they're trying to get to, right? And it just is more of in a numbers perspective than in a maybe a more traditional marketing or art kind of graphic, or promotions or whatever, right? But a good analyst, I think, is always still has to have that creative kind of mindset of, how to get to the answer that they're looking to get to, based on limited resources or data that they have. So I feel like it's kind of always been there, and it was just applying it and massaging it over time and with experience to be more applied to kind of the role that I'm in now.
So you've worked for several markets. I don't know if we touched about this in the beginning, but give a high level of the different areas, the different parts of the country you've worked in.
So as an engineer, I was in Texas, Vegas a couple of times in my career. I worked down in Miami, Bahamas area. I worked up in New York, worked in Connecticut. But also when I was in Vegas, I was working for, I guess, Caesars at the time, and they had a pottage structure. So even though I lived in Vegas, my responsibility for part of my marketing career was Atlantic City and Philadelphia, and then we kind of rotated, and I inherited the Ohio properties in southern Indiana down by Louisville.
So two questions I want to ask on this front. The first being, for you, because you have a family, married, to move,
Mhm.
advice. It sounds like earlier you said, I kind of just raised my hand first. I'll run into the fire, so to speak. But looking back on it, when you think through a career jump to a different market or moving, any advice or any thoughts looking back on making those decisions?
Yeah, I think so I'm extremely fortunate in the fact that my husband has a career slash vocation that doesn't require him to be in any certain location, right? He's self-employed and does his own thing. So wherever we did move to, he could do from there, right? And my kids were young when we were first moving, so there were no kids. So it was, I hadn't have to worry about school and things like that. Got a little bit older, and I think I don't regret any of the moves that I made. It put me where I am today. My kids are, I feel like, pretty resilient based on the fact that we've been in a lot of different places. I think it's just, you just honestly have to think about what you want, how your family is, and again, like I said, like maybe if my kids were different, I would have felt differently about moving, right? So you kind of know yourself, your family, your needs better than others. I think the other thing too is honestly, I had a really small, um, like my mom and dad, for instance, it's just me, my mom and dad, and my brother. Like I didn't have like a central family unit, even that I'd be moving away from that was like substantial, right? And I think that also plays into some of it. So whether I moved or not, wasn't moving away from a lot of help. So but I think also it's also, weighing into like future. You have to think about the future. And is it short-term pain for long-term gain? Are you jumping at opportunities that may not pay off in the future, right? And you just made the sacrifice, but it's not really worth it. There's both sides of that coin to look at. I've seen a lot of people turn down really good jobs that have regretted it. And then I've seen a lot of people that jumped at opportunities that wish they hadn't, right? So unfortunately, it's not a one size fits all, but definitely the analytics guide has to come out of you and understand the pros and the cons and what happens 5 years, 10 years down the road, right? And whether that move was worth it.
It's a great, area you hit. I wrote down a couple notes there. I think it's trade-offs,
Mm-hmm.
understanding the trade-offs and living with that. And then also every great thing involves resistance. And to your point, the trade-off for you and your family is that skill set and what you brought to your family. There's some great upside in that too. So yes, it's challenging. There's some positive trade-offs there too. And the value, which I wanted about the second part of my question, how valuable has that been for you working in different markets, different casinos? How has that helped you as a leader today?
I personally feel that it was extremely helpful. Understanding different markets, how different things work, how different companies work. I'll give an example because I like examples. So when I worked at Caesars, it's a very structured corporate environment, and there's a lot of people that do things, and a lot of things happen behind the scenes that you don't even realize are occurring sometimes in what you're doing, right? Because you're handing it off to your partners in crime next door, right, to handle execution or whatever it might be. Fast forward, I went to work for Resorts World, which was not that structure, and you quickly become a jack of all trades and learning how to do things that you didn't even realize were being done while working at Caesars. And I think uh, to me, that was extremely helpful. I mean, it just continued to grow my knowledge and understanding how things work. So as you're having these business conversations, especially as you move up the ladder, you kind of understand more how every piece is, kind of firing as, like to your point, the finance side, how are the finance even being recorded? What is it going to affect the EBITDA? How balance sheets work, and then on the resort side, like how does hotel yield work? I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that you become more and more exposed to. But I do think being in different markets is very helpful also because you're just getting exposed to so many different ways of doing things, and you're kind of like absorbing it all and picking and choosing what works. And then what works in one area may not work in another area that you move, right? But having that breadth of kind of a toolbox is extremely helpful.
Right. Because you've seen it before. Maybe not exactly, but because of the reps and And that totally makes sense. And as the senior top marketing person for Yaamava, there's a lot of people looking at you and be like, how is that possible? Or there's somebody who's might be earlier in their career. So if I'm trying to build up my skill set to maybe one day be a senior leader, a senior vice president, a CMO at a casino and resort, for you, 3, 5, how many you think? But if you think of like the core qualities or ingredients to get you on the path to get there, for you, what comes to mind?
I think so. I think there's a couple things. I think one is just from a leadership standpoint in general, right? And one is making sure that you're not always the smartest person in the room. I think you always have to be around people that are going to push you and challenge you to learn and expand your mind and how you think about things. And I think two is being humble enough to know you're not the smartest person in the room and be able to accept that information that is around you and absorb it kind of like a sponge. I think also you just have that mindset of like, I don't want to say tenacity because I hate using that word, but just to persevere through things, right? And accepting challenges and although I think a lot of people are like, oh, these leaders are so like self-assured, and everyone has doubts. You just have to push through them, right? And have confidence in yourself that you're going to get through it. And if you put the effort into it, I think most people can. And if you don't, then make sure you learn from it, right? I think the other thing is, I think a lot of leaders have always said not being afraid to fail, but if you do, you need to own it, right? Like, because that's how you're going to learn. And I think more people will appreciate and respect you if you own the failure, and that this is how I'm going to, fix it. And this is how we're going to be better tomorrow.
Some great ones in there. I think like I tried to like boil it down. If I had to like say 3 words in there, not always the smartest person in the room. To me, that's like a big sign of humility, perseverance, and accountability.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are huge. And for, I'm thinking about it now, like 2024 environment. If someone's just starting their career, like right now, what words of advice if someone's just starting here, whether it's Yaamava or whatever casino it may be, but going forward, if you're just to say like a sentence or guidance to that person just starting their career, they're excited about the casino, entertainment, hospitality industry, what would you say to that person?
I'd say not only be open to change, but embrace change. Things, we are the epitome of change here at Yaamava over the past 3 years that I've been here, right? And some have come kicking and screaming, and others have come along on the ride. And change is inevitable. So you might as well be a part of it and kind of forge your own path, right? As opposed to being on the other side of it when it's all said and done.
Yeah, that's a key one. And I think Yaamava is a different animal, but just casino hospitality industry in general, it's just like, I think for those who love it, understand that, they wouldn't change it. But those who probably don't work out or don't last long are the ones who don't understand that change, because it's all the time, 24/7, 365. Last question before I pivot here, Jen. So for you, what is the most underrated quality to being a good leader?
So I'm going to give you 2.
Okay.
Empathy. Maybe I'll give you 3. Empathy, humility, and the ability to listen.
Which one
objectiveness is in there too, but
for you, which one is the hardest of those categories? For you, which one was the hardest to kind of get better at?
Probably the listening. I'm kind of a stubborn person and have my own opinions. And so sitting down and listening, right, before forming an opinion, you come in objective, showing empathy, right, and a little humility, I think was kind of goes a long ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate. And I feel like a lot of leaders can relate. It's listening is a true skill,
Mhm.
especially in the environment we're in now, where we can easily be distracted with email, phone, social, like always being on. I feel like that one takes some intentional practice. So I think you saying that, I feel like a lot of people can relate. So, Jen, I didn't tell you this, but we're going to jump to a segment here called the bigger picture, where I'm going to show a picture and we just riff. It could be a picture, it could be a quote.
Okay.
For those listening via podcast, go to the nextlevelcareers.com if you want to watch, but I'll speak to the picture. So, starting here, you were recently recognized as Venue Now Woman of Live, and it was a great article. And congratulations, by the way. But one of the things I want to hit on was this quote you had, which is, "I realize that you're speaking about the theater. I
Mhm.
realize that such growth, name recognition, and reputation may be unprecedented in such a short time." And that is understating it. In what, 2 years, I think, we've
Mhm.
had the theater, and you look at what we've done, the acts we get, the major success it's been. But for you, being at the helm of it all, when I read this quote in its simplest form, what has made this possible, building this one of a kind Yaamava theater experience we have here?
Um, it is. I attribute it to three things. It is the support of the tribe. It is the support of the executive team here, and it is the support of the marketing team. I could not have done anything like this by myself. Having the support to do what we do from above, and then everyone else making everything happen, right? From the theater, giving the exemplary experiences, booking those incredible acts, to you and your team putting out the word and getting billboards every 5 feet, and then beyond and beyond all of that. So to me, it truly takes a team on this one, and I give everyone credit for just making it happen.
Has it surprised you at all?
It it did a little. I'll be honest. Yes, I mean it's one of those things where you have hope, right? But you also want to. I like to underpromise and overdeliver, right? So you walk in knowing like, this is where I want to be. This is what I'm going to strive to be. This is maybe where I will be, right? So we have surpassed anything and everything that I thought we could accomplish in the period of time that we did. So again, like I said, kudos to the team out there as well, if anyone's listening, because we could not have done it without their support.
Yeah, it's incredible what the team, your leadership has been as far as a success. And just thinking about 2 years ago, there's just kind of a preconceived notion of what casino acts are.
Mm-hmm.
And to have the goals that we had and to be where we were at day one to now where entertainers, booking agents, they want to be a part of it. And it's just come 180. And to your point, it's due to the team, it's due to the leadership, and most importantly, first the tribe. And to me, it's just been so cool to watch and be a small part of. And it's been really cool having you at the helm lead us. The next slide here is a stat we like to throw around, but it's a true stat. And I actually looked this up. They just published Las Vegas numbers, and it's about 41 million. And at Yaamava, we have over 13 million a year. So for those listening, it's about 31% of the volume of visitors of Las Vegas coming through Yaamava's doors. So long-winded way to ask the question of, for us to be the second most visited property outside of just Mickey Mouse, Disneyland, to you, what is the key ingredient or the high level, or take this question where you want, but what has been the success behind this tremendous volume of visitation?
Um, it is the amount of effort, I believe, that goes into the hiring of our staff here on property.
Okay.
And then those leaders. And the reason I say that is like, now I'm not going to not give credit to the marketing team, because like our job is to make people want to come, right? But I would say 80% of it is that once we get them here, they've got to want to come back, right? And we can't control that. So I've worked at places where, you could get them in, but they wouldn't come back. And so trying to, create that loyalty and that experience that they're getting what we're selling, right? That the experience, right? And so, and I think and you and I've both been in it, right? Where we don't do our hiring lightly. We want to make sure we have the right people in the right positions with the right cultural fit, with the right kind of mentality. And it goes all the way down to, the line level employee giving those same experiences that we're expecting from the executive team. So,
yeah, it truly is a whole team effort. And you're right, from everything we do on the marketing side to get them in the doors, but more importantly, how they're treated, the guest service levels. One of the big things that attracted me to formerly San Manuel was when I walked the floor, I noticed leaders were pushing in the chairs, they were picking up trash. And you have to. Like, if you see the volume and you see how clean our facility is, you can't just rely on facilities to keep it clean.
right.
Like, everyone has a part in it. And I think you hit on that. It's a full team holistic effort, and 100%, I think that's what's driven our success and will continue to. And to your point, the hiring part and who we bring on and how fast we move, I think those are all critical pieces. Here's a fun one. So I think partnerships is always a good topic, especially when I have the leader of marketing for such as Yaamava on, because there's so many, right? Like from gaming vendors to continuity to IT product to sports partnerships to, so I just grabbed a few that we've done as of like the last 4 weeks, which is here's a headline from VaynerMedia, selected as the agency for Yaamava Resort and Casino, which we work with a lot of agencies. AEG, a headline here, San Manuel announces 16th year in partnership shaping the future of sports and live entertainment across Southern California. And then I got a picture of some ramen product with Nongshim, where we did an activation around Ramen Day, which was a huge success. But long-winded question to say, for you, when you evaluate partnerships across the board, which we have several and a lot of people listening probably can relate, as you evaluate a true partner or partnerships, what are the kind of things you look for, and what advice would you give, lessons learned there?
So a couple of things. I think the key word in that question is partner. I really like to make sure that who we are engaging with is truly viewing us as a partner and not just a check writer, I guess, for lack of a better term. Someone who is really, involved and has skin in the game in wanting both of us to succeed in whatever partnership is occurring, right? So I think the other thing is, then obviously on the second piece of it is just what is the return possibilities for us in terms of, and sometimes it's thinking outside the box, like, so going back to your creative question earlier about how, I don't think a lot of people would think that we'd want to partner with a ramen. Like, that's not the first thing that comes to mind, but it's on trend. There's a lot of social media, it's trying to think outside of the box of what is traditional and how you can leverage these partnerships and their reach and their relationships to the advantage of both of us, right? And I think, and I'm also huge on being on the integrity of our relationship as well, which means, like, if whatever I expect out of my partner, I would want to do the same, meaning, like, I feel like we also give a lot to our partners in terms of exposure and allowing them to utilize us in ways that benefit them as well. Because I like it to be like a mutually beneficial partnership as opposed to one way.
Yeah, and you kind of hit on it, but I was also going to follow up and ask, kind of compare and contrast. You talked about the value of partnerships, but the other side of it, what makes partnerships not work out?
Yeah, when it's not a partnership and it's kind of this is everything that is included in our contract. This is all you get, nothing more, nothing less. We're not going to go above and beyond. If I need a ticket to this show for a great player, they're not going to oblige. You know what I mean? Like, things like that are kind of like what pops in my head. And because we are extremely fluid and we pivot a lot, and I need our partners to be able to understand that and do the same, right? Like what we might have agreed to in a contract 10 years ago may not work for us now. And so, not saying that we just want to change it or renege on the contract, but let's talk about how can we make it work and be beneficial for both of us, right?
Yeah, 100%. And understanding it's a relationship, and where are the true value adds, and not everything is penciled in, but we're constantly working together to help each other. And
Right.
I think that's key. And I love the ramen example. And I think this speaks to you as a leader, because it's like, hey, I see this. I think there's an opportunity here. To your point, it's relevant right now. We should move on it now.
Hmm.
I think has that been foundational to your success? Is just like recognizing things, kind of leaning into that curiosity and acting on it?
Um, I guess now that you asked the question, I would say, yeah, probably. Never really thought about it that way, but I guess there's a trend there. Um, and part of it too is, and I've not been as fortunate in other places to be able to do that as much as I have here, right? Just because of our size and the support that we have from everyone, we are able to make changes and do things quicker and faster and while they're relevant. AK also, I know you guys had a great idea with the Stanley Cups, right? So it's capitalizing on what is happening now. If you wait too long, it's not even worth it, right? So
Right. And I love that you flagged kind of, not every culture, every place you work for is like that. But if
mhm.
you are in a situation where your leadership does support, innovative ideas or just the ability to fail, right? And not epically fail, then you
Right.
should embrace it. And I think that's important for our listeners out there. Pivoting a little bit, and Jen, thanks again for joining me here today. This was super valuable, but this is kind of an interesting question. So if I were to go back 10 years ago, 2014, looking back, macro perspective, casino, entertainment, hospitality, the industry we're in, what do you think we underestimated the most back then?
So I think this one has kind of two legs for me as I think about the question. So one is, and I don't think this is an estimation more per se, is just a didn't know, meaning like post COVID, I think a lot of things have changed with hospitality and entertainment, and there's nothing any of us could have ever done to see that was going to happen, right? Like, so that's one. But on the flip side, I think the rise and emergence of tribal gaming,
Yeah.
I think, is something that I think the tribal gaming was underestimated in 2014, to be frank. And now, there's quite a few organizations that have risen up to be powerhouses within gaming overall, both commercial and tribal. And I think that's something that I don't know. I think they were underestimated in 2014 versus now.
Yeah, that's a great call. I never thought about it that way. But yeah, if you go back 10 years ago, and just the comps were just at like IGA, you just see it, some of the properties there, and to your point, their presence and what they offer the guests, what they provide the community with jobs, just you said it perfectly, the powerhouses that they are. It's been incredible. And now we're going to go the other way. So me and you are doing this interview 10 years from now. Jen, how are you doing? We're having a great conversation. And I asked the same question. I say, Jen, looking back 10 years ago, what do you think we underestimated the most, or something we underestimated? What do you think your response will be?
Wow, that one's even like crystal ballish, right? You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
If I were to guess, I still think gaming is still really expanding, right?
Mhm.
In markets, and there's Hawaii doesn't have a casino. Texas is very limited. You know what I mean? Like, um, I feel like that one, we still don't fully understand how that's going to play out and what the impact it could be to overall gaming in general, right? I mean, because if you think about it, 20, 30 years ago, before they opened Casino Pennsylvania, like the impact Pennsylvania had on those neighboring states, like the Connecticut's and whatnot, and then Massachusetts opening, and then that, what did that do? You know, so I think that one's kind of a wild card because it depends on voters and getting it in, and you know what I mean, and commercial gaming being allowed. So I think there's so many wild cards around it. I feel like maybe that's one of those things that we could be underestimating how quickly more casinos could be popping up. We've got tribes putting land in trust now, you know, so I think it's a lot of unknown, and we may be underestimating how many competitors could be popping up in the next 10 years.
So with your role now, I forgot to ask this, but I think it's critical for this audience. You oversee entertainment, you oversee advertising, property marketing, promotions, you oversee strategic marketing. There's so many different layers to your responsibility. But if I had to ask you, in its simplest form, the main function of my role today is blank. How would you answer that question?
Alignment.
I like that. Could you elaborate?
So I read a quote a few weeks ago. I was looking for some, to be honest, I was looking for some quotes on strategy for presentation, and one popped up that was, building a visionary company requires 1% vision and 99% alignment. And I believe in that wholeheartedly because, again, as we talked about earlier, everything that we've done cannot be done by me alone. But I need to make sure everyone's pushing the same rock. I need everyone's got the same goal. Otherwise, we are not going to be successful, right? If I've got, if guest services isn't aware of a promotion that we're running, and you know and it even goes beyond our departments. You know, the slots needs to be aware, table games. Everyone needs to know what's happening for us to be all giving that exemplary service towards the guests. So it starts with marketing, be aligned, and marketing the right things to the right people, and kind of amplifying each other like they're meant to, and then following up with the execution side.
That's a great response. Yeah, to make sure we're all rowing in the right direction. The best advice you ever received?
Hire smart people.
And then we're going to go the other side of the coin. The worst advice you ever received?
I think I've just forgotten them all.
You just blocked it all out.
I kind of think I might have, though. I mean, because you're like, well, that was really bad advice, so I'm not going to remember that. I only have so much brain power that I can retain. So,
but there's not like maybe it's not terrible advice, but was there like a common one out there that you just kind of push back a little bit? Like, I don't know if that's true. Like, I could just say for me as a male, it was always tied like, oh, nice guys finish last. I'm like, that's not true. Like, you could be mean and a bully, and you could get ahead in the short term, but long term it's never going to work out. So I feel like that advice is only true to the smallest aspect, but when you zoom out, that's not true at all. So is there anything that you've heard over the course of your career that you're like, I challenge that a little bit?
Maybe not necessarily heard, but I do think that there's a lot of weight given to people with extroverted nature, and you don't have to be that way to be successful, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, I don't think people need to pretend to be something that they're not in order to be successful. They just need to embrace who they are. And obviously we're always going to try to improve ourselves and just be self-aware, but I don't think people should be held back because they don't like to public speak or do whatever.
That's a good one. Real quick, I want to hit on. So when people, and I'm sure this happens, when people come to your office and they say, I don't want to talk up, or I don't want to speak out, that's just not me. How do you advise people to stand out, though? If they want to be in a leadership position, they're going to have to communicate. To your point, you don't have to be crazy extroverted, this big personality, but how do you advise folks who kind of shy away from the spotlight or public speaking when it's not kind of in their nature?
I think it's a couple of things. I think one is if you're talking about just speaking up in general, I think it's speak up when it's important to you, right? Like, because what I don't want is you not speaking up about something that you're passionate about because you're afraid to, right? That's not a good leader. Now, you may not want to join every conversation that's being had, but you need to at least speak up on the ones that are either affecting you or you're feel passionate about, right? Don't just sit and suppress your thoughts.
Right.
And then I think for public speaking, it's one of those things where you have to practice it. Like, and you're never, I don't think anyone is ever comfortable like doing it, right? And you have to, and just realize that, right? Yaamava is unique in the sense that I believe everyone out there is so supportive of one another. It's like, a lot of people are worried about public speaking because they're worried about how they're going to be portrayed or people are going to think about them, or and I've seen it personally where we've supported several individuals that really did not want to be up there, right? So we're unique in that sense, but it's, practice makes perfect, and start small, and, ask for help. And sometimes maybe, go in, you could dip your toe by tag teaming or doing a group prezzo or, things of that nature. But I also feel like when you're doing a presentation, you are always going to be better when you're talking about a topic and you're passionate about,
100%.
right? And so that would be where I would start, right? Get that confidence built up, talking about something that you could just off the cuff talk an hour about without having to do a presentation, because that's how much you know that topic. And I think the rest kind of just comes with it.
Yeah, I wrote down a couple notes there. I think that is critical. I think you can get reps in on subjects where literally like you're just talking to your colleague, right? Like you're not presenting, so to speak, but you're getting your reps in on trying to become more of an expert on whatever the field is or the thing you're trying to obtain. And then also, you mentioned it again about Yaamava, the uniqueness and the ability to fail. I mean, think about this podcast. I mean, I literally listened to the first episode and I did it with Peter, and the amount of ums and and it's painful, but it's awesome to work. And I still do it to this day, right? I'll listen back to this and be like, oh, but to your point, to be in that kind of creative space, to have leaders who trust you, who allow you, if you're in that kind of organization, if you're listening out there, take full advantage of that, because that's where you're really going to grow. Jen, just a final few questions here. Advice to your younger self. So what advice would you give to Jennifer those first few days in her career?
Relationships are important. Don't underestimate them. I always thought that if I just put my head down and churned out great work, that would be enough. And it's not. Unfortunately, that's just not how humans are, right? And so take the opportunity to build the relationships. Even if you're an introvert, you can still build them, right? And be your authentic self. And but also take opportunities to build them when you can. Like, don't shy away from them. And again, it's pacing yourself if you don't like going out, and it may be as little as going to grab a drink with a coworker, right? Like, it's just building relationships so that you have this little black book when you career progresses of people you can call on. You never know where people are going to end up that can help you be successful.
Yeah, and I think that is super critical for those. I think no matter where you're at in your career journey, but especially for those who are just starting, because when you're younger, you have a little bit more time, and then you start collecting dogs and cats and kids and responsibilities. It's a little harder. So I think saying yes earlier in your career, the more you can, it just naturally, just the cycle of life, it becomes a little more harder. But the more that you can open yourself up earlier, I think better. I think that's amazing advice. You're so real quickly, outside of work, for you, how do you unplug, or where is your kind of sources of creative inspiration so that you are recharged when you are doing everything you're doing here at Yaamava?
So if I'm really looking to recharge, it is crime shows and coffee. With my blanket. I like blankets. I have them all over the house. That's kind of just that mindless, not really thinking about anything, just kind of existing state.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, and this sounds weird, but I always find things that connect dots. But one of my rabbit holes that I can tend to go into, which actually is not mindless and actually can kind of wear me out, is TikTok videos on organization. So I'm always on part of, as I mentioned earlier about always wanting to be better today than I was yesterday. Part of that for me is being more organized, both at home and at work, making sure I'm re-condoing everything, right? Like things have a place and this is where it goes. And if you can remove that stress out of your life, like you can put effort towards other things. But also on the flip side of it, there are just some really creative people and how they've, repurpose things to store things and be efficient. And I love efficiency. So I can just continue to go down rabbit holes on TikTok with organization, clutter, storage, whatever you want to call it.
I heard this quote once. It was cluttered space, cluttered mind.
Yeah.
And I need to practice a little more. But I do find as I've gotten older, like I'm not a minimalist, but I get how people go there, right? Because to your point, it frees up space in the mind when you're not dealing with a bunch of stuff. So for you, real quick, what's the biggest hack on organization that you found through TikTok or video or whatever it may be?
Oh man, it's not really a hack. It was just finding things that I didn't realize even existed out there, like belt organizers, or like those shoe stack things, because I just have like a pile of shoes by the door. You know what I mean? There's just, I think also as you get older and time becomes more important to you, right? It's like you find these things that you can just buy and like implement quickly, and it saves you time and effort, right? So there's other things. Oh, a rice dispenser. I thought that was pretty cool. So instead of having a big bag of rice like sitting in the bottom of a cabinet, it's in a nice organizational dispenser. So that's kind of usually what I find that helps me at least start to declutter my mind.
The next time we do this interview, we're going to do a bigger picture and you're going to share some of your organizational secrets and some of the things you're speaking of so that we can provide more value to the audience. Last few questions here, Jen. I know you're a music person, but if you could only listen to one genre of music the rest of your life, what would it be?
That's really hard because I actually do enjoy many, many different types of music, and just depending on my mood. If I had to pick one, I would say, and I don't even know if this is a genre, but I would say 80s. And the reason I say that, although I love like 90s hip hop and R&B, I think 80s gives, if it were for the rest of my life, has a breadth of different variations of music in that decade that could get me through my different moods and emotions for the rest of my life.
Solid argument. Because I know it's like, when I've been in your office, I've heard like a lot of 90s hip hop. So understood that would be the close second. So last question, this platform's all about trying to help people take their career to the next level. So Jen, once again, thank you. This has been very helpful, but as the parting words for you, if you were only provide 3 tips to somebody on, hey, no matter where you're at in your career, if you want to take your career to the next level, this is the 3 tips I'd provide. What would those be for you?
I think they're kind of a reiteration or conglomeration of stuff I've said before, but open or embrace change, really important. Change is inevitable, so might as well embrace it. Use it to your advantage. Surround yourself with smart people and have a tribe that lifts you up. You need that in all facets of your life. And I think lastly, just remain humble. I think it's just really important to have some sort of humility as you move up and around and through life, and understand you don't always understand everyone else's, where they came from. So everyone's story. So it's always different. So remain humble.
Jen, thanks again. Those are great 3 tips. And thank you. Honestly, you're a genuine leader. You're amazing to work with. And I think just through the course of this interview, people will see that. But thank you for taking the time, and thank you for everything that you do.
All right. Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thanks. You too.
Check out more episodes at thenextlevelcareers.com.